Everybody, this is Raymond. Today we have a nice 12-game slate featuring a lot of teams and a lot of good pitching, a lot of good batters. We got some great value across the board. Lots of plays available, so it's a really good slate, though it's going to be somewhat harder for core plays. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? And also, drop a comment below with your home run calls. Frank Del Plato, the last day I did home run calls, I had Bobby Witt called, so I didn't want to shout him out. And with that said, let's go ahead and get into it. Again, smash that like and subscribe button. Really helps the channel. Also, share it on Twitter and Facebook and wherever else. And then, yeah, so let's go ahead and get into the slate. So for my core plays, for DraftKings first, I have Ohtani, William Contreras, and Josh Jung. And then over on FanDuel, I have Josh Jung. The core plays are kind of rough today because there's quite a lot of good options across the board. But I whittled it down to a few options at every position here, so hopefully we can have a pretty solid slate. We do have some weather concerns as well in Miami and Cleveland game. It does look pretty rough. It looks like they'll probably play, but the conditions are not ideal. And then for the Washington-Minnesota game, it looks like it might snow, and so do keep that in mind. And maybe that game gets called early, but we'll have to wait and see on those two games. But those are the two big weather concerns for the slate. With that said, let's go ahead and get into it, though. For pitchers, we're going to start with Ohtani, who's obviously fairly expensive at $10,800, but he's in a great matchup here against Kansas City. He's dominated to start the season, and he's had two really solid games so far with a pretty good strikeout rate, and so he's got really nice upside here on the slate. Actually, 3 games, sorry, but where he's pitched. But overall, he's in a really good spot here. I think he's in a great matchup. And this is a near must play on the slate. I think he is a core play at pitcher. And then, if you want to get some options for that P2 option, Aaron Nola is a really solid option today, despite the fact that he started the season pretty rough. Last season he was very good, and I think he's a good P2 option here considering the price, but he's not been dominant to start. But he's got a great matchup here against Colorado. Even though the matchups weren't ideal or weren't that bad for his last 2 games, he didn't do great. He's been giving up a lot of hits and stuff. But he does have some K potential here, and he does have the potential for a 25 or 25 point game. So he is in the running here. John Gray is also somebody I like today for Texas against Oakland. He's a little bit more expensive than I like him to be, but he's played pretty well despite the tough situation when it comes to the pitching, for the team or for the games he's had to play against. So I do think this is a nice matchup for him. I wish he was a little bit cheaper, but he is viable on the slate. Then we'll look at Freddie Peralta for the Milwaukee Brewers. He has some really nice upside in this matchup. Obviously, Boston does hit the ball pretty well, but he's a good contrarian option to Ohtani if you want to move off of Ohtani. He's got a good enough K rate that gives him some nice upside in this situation. And then Tyler Mahle, he is kind of risky because he could get snowed out here, which is a wild thing to say, but he has pitched pretty decently to start the season, including a really good game against Miami. His K rate's actually been pretty solid, and so that's why he's available as an option here, but he's pretty risky, and he's not cheap enough to make him a must-play by any stretch of imagination. So then we're going to get into our catchers, and we really have a couple guys to take a look at here, but Adley Rutschman has been really solid to start the year. He hasn't done much the last couple of games, but he has nice upside in this matchup, and so he is viable on the slate. Danny Jansen, I really like when he pops up to the top of the board here, despite the fact that he hasn't really done much to start the season. He has home run potential in this game, so he is worth taking a look at as kind of a Hail Mary play, but he is viable here as a pretty cheap option. Jonah Heim also has a lot of utility here, especially in the Texas Rangers stack. He has some nice upside here, and he's been hitting the ball pretty well to start the season. And then William Contreras, I think he's due for a home run here. He hasn't hit one yet to start the season, but it's a matter of time before he does. He's been getting hits in most games, and his batting average is really solid, so I think he's just, it's just a matter of time. This is a great situation for him, and that's why he's a core play, but I like Jonah Heim just as much as I like Contreras, to be honest. Vlad Guerrero Jr. for Toronto, also an extremely good option today at batting .338 to start the season. He's got home run potential in this game. It is a tougher matchup against German, but he has some nice upside, and if he can get to him early, then it could be a long day for Jermaine. So for Texas, I really like Nathaniel Lowe. He is a little bit over expensive, but he is viable as an alternative to Vlad Jr. He's got some nice upside here, and he's worth a look. Rowdy Tellez, if he was a few $100s cheaper, he would have been a core play today. He's got really good metrics for this matchup. He's got home run potential, and he's kind of a boomer bust candidate sometimes. I wish he was around $3,500, but he is a viable option on the slate. Wilmer Flores is also a very nice option here for the Giants. He's got some really good upside in this matchup, and I really like the metrics for him on this situation. Then we'll look at Vinny Pasquanto for Kansas City. Now, he is a boomer bust potential option here. Hail Mary play going up against Ohtani, but the metrics match up for him to have a really good opportunity here for a home run. He's this high risk, high reward in this situation. And then Darren Ruff is a cheap value play if you want to go with it. He is a nice utility option as a good matchup potential from this perspective. So then we're going to look at second base, and we're going to start with Arraez for Miami. Now, he's got some really nice upside in this situation. I really like him as a core play here. He is as a near core play here, rather, only because there's several good options at the position. I didn't utilize him there, but he's got really good potential and has nice upside in this matchup. Then we'll look at Jeff McNeil, who I really like a lot as well, and he could also play in the outfield. He has good potential in this game for the Mets. I really do like the Mets today, despite the not really being a stackable team. They just have a couple guys that you could definitely stick in there, but he is viable on the slate. Gabby Torres for the Yankees, also very interesting today. He's got high risk, high reward, though, due to his price, but he's a good option here, and a good contrarian option would be Oswaldo Pereza. If he draws a start for the Yankees, he started the season, only played in 3 games so far, but he has some pretty nice upside here, and if he can get a good game here, then that would definitely pay off for us, especially with his cheap price. Helps us pay up for pitching as well. Then we'll look at third base and Josh Jung. He is a great play on the slate. He's priced very fairly here on FanDuel, on DraftKings rather. He's been hitting the ball extremely well lately, and I like his upside in this matchup. Then we'll look at a couple other options though. In GJ LeMahieu, he's a good contrarian option. He's kind of high risk, high reward, but he has some utility here as the Yankees are a good team on the slate. And then Gunnar Henderson is kind of a contrarian value option here at $3,800. He hasn't hit the ball particularly well. He is kind of a boomer bust candidate, but he does have some upside in this situation. And then we'll look into the shortstops. Now, we kind of have a duo of Tatis and Bogarts, and those two guys are both nearly priced the same. Now, Tatis was a lot less expensive yesterday, but he's now very expensive, and he's probably avoidable as a result of that, especially when you have 2 other options that are cheap at shortstop, including Gunnar Henderson, who I already talked about, and Oswald Pereza, who I already talked about, who is almost a core play at shortstop because there's just not much left available there. And then when we move into the outfield, so Mike Trout is obviously a great option on the slate, as well as Aaron Judge. I just wanted to mention those 2 guys because they have massive home run potential in this situation, but they are very expensive and hard to roster. But Toscar Hernandez is pretty expensive today, and he has been a little bit boomer bust so far this season, but he's got a great matchup here, and he's got good potential. He's not a huge, batting average guy, but he will be swinging for the fences and will have good opportunity here in this matchup. Corbin Carroll also has been hitting the ball pretty solid to start the season, and he looks like a really solid play at this situation as well. His price is a little higher than I'd like it to be, but he does have some viability here. And then Kerry Carpenter for Detroit. He's kind of a cheap option that you can really try to attract here as a kind of a one-off from Detroit. He's been hitting the ball pretty solid lately, and so I really like his matchup situation. Jesse Winker for Milwaukee is a great option and a Milwaukee stack. He hasn't hit a home run yet this season, but he does have that power, and he's actually been hitting the ball pretty decent, and that gives him some nice upside in this situation. And then Jeff McNeil, who's another guy you can put in the outfield who is also at second base. He does have some nice home run potential in this matchup as well. So let's go ahead and get over here to FanDuel, and we're going to start with Ohtani. And despite the fact that he's super expensive over here at $11,400, we are looking for a guy that can get 50 to 60 fantasy points. He's definitely capable of that. and he has some nice upside in this matchup, especially with the K rate and the weak opponent. He is actually pretty usable today because there's so much value across the board, so he's worth taking a look at. And then for an alternative to him, really Aaron Nola is the best option for Philly. He's got some really good upside here. He has almost as much upside as Ohtani, but he is a little bit riskier, just the fact that he's not Ohtani and doesn't have the K rate that Ohtani does, but he does have the upside. John Gray also has some utility here as a contrarian option as well, but he's high risk, high reward in this situation for a FanDuel, since he probably doesn't quite have the upside as Ohtani does. And same goes for Tyler Mahle, who I also do like here on FanDuel, but because of his price. But he doesn't really have that 60 fantasy point upside that we want on this particular slate, but he does help you pay up for some other options on it. Then we're going to look at first base and catcher. Now, we have a lot of good options here. Adley Rutschman, obviously a great option on the slate if he can get going again. He's had a couple games where he hasn't been great, but he has some nice upside in this matchup. He is very expensive, though. Vlad Jr. is also very expensive, but he also has some nice upside in this matchup, and he's been hitting the ball really well lately. Then we're going to get into Vinny Pasquantino for Kansas City. Now, he's kind of a Hail Mary option on the slate because he's high risk, high reward since he's going against Ohtani. But if anybody against Ohtani today looks decent, he is the one guy. Nathaniel Lowe for Texas also looks very interesting today. I really like his upside in this matchup. He's kind of high risk, high reward, but he's got home run potential here. And then we're going to look at Flores for San Francisco, who can play first, second, or third base on this slate. And he is a contrarian play and a value play to help you pay up for some other options. Jonah Heim, I really do like him today for Texas, but he's not a must-play here on FanDuel like he could potentially be on DraftKings other than Contreras. And he has some big-time upside. He's a boom or bust candidate here for FanDuel, but he's cheap enough that you can take a look at him. And then Rowdy Tellez, he's a guy I really think has home run potential in this matchup, but he is high risk, high reward, so do keep that in mind. And then William Contreras for Milwaukee. He has some nice upside in this situation, and I think he's got some high risk, high reward potential for a home run as well. But there's so many good options at the catcher first base position today, especially here on FanDuel and DraftKings for that matter, that none of them are really core plays, but they definitely have some good options. Gleyber Torres is a very good option at second base. He has some nice upside here, but we do actually have a couple good options here, so he's not a must-play, but he's definitely viable on the slate. Wilmer Flores has some really nice upside, being that he can play at first, second, or third base, like I mentioned, and so he's definitely worth taking a look. And then Jeff McNeil, he's a really good option here. Now, he only can play second base on FanDuel, unlike on DraftKings where he can also play in the outfield, but he's got some really good potential here, and I think there's home run potential. Then we're looking at Josh Jung for Texas, and he's got some really good upside here. I really do like him on the slate, and he's a really good play at this position. Austin Riley is surprisingly cheap at $3,300 here on FanDuel, and so he's definitely worth a look here. He's got big-time potential in this matchup. And then Manny Machado, I really do like his price here at just $2,900. He is viable here. Third base is actually really good today here on FanDuel, and so you got three really good options at this position. At shortstop, it gets a little bit rougher because we have Xander Bogaerts, who's pretty expensive here. And he is viable on the slate. He's got home run potential. Tatis Jr. is way expensive at $4,500, but he is worth a look despite the fact that he started the season off with nothing in the first game, and even in 5 at-bats. But Gunnar Henderson has some really nice upside in this matchup, but he is high risk, high reward. He's not hitting the ball very well, but the metrics do sound off for him here. And then Willy Adames is actually a pretty decent price here, and if you go with a Milwaukee stack, then he's definitely worth taking a look. Oswaldo Perez also has some really nice upside in this matchup here for the Yankees. He's very cheap here as well, which helps you pay up for other guys in this slate, and also helps you potentially put in Ohtani if that's who you want as your pitcher. And then we're going to move into the outfield, and we have obviously Trout and Judge are both great options on the slate. They have all the upside you could want on the slate, and so I definitely think they're both worth taking a look at. But one of my favorite plays in the outfield is Teoscar Hernandez, because he continues to be underpriced on FanDuel, which gives him some viability, though he does have a tendency to be a high-risk, high-reward option. he is worth taking a look here. Same can be said for Kyle Schwarber. He's becoming a very similar situation guy where he's kind of like a boomer bust potential, but he definitely has some nice upside here. Corbin Carroll has hit the ball extremely well to start the season, and he's got home run potential. He's had some really good games, and so I look for him to continue that here. Kerry Carpenter is a kind of a low, cheap boomer bust play. He's got some high risk, high reward, but he has nice opportunity here, and he's been one of the few decent plays on Detroit this season. Byron Buxton, he's way too cheap here on FanDuel. If this game plays, he's definitely worth taking a look, but he has not been very well to start the season. Just only batting .226 with 2 home runs so far, but he does have that potential. And once he starts going, this price won't stay this low for long. Jesse Winker for $2,900 is also a very interesting option here in a Milwaukee stack, which I really like today. He's got some nice upside. And then finally, Brandon Nimmo. He's a great contrarian option at this position. He's hitting the ball pretty well. He also has stolen base potential, and he's been just a good fantasy producer to start the year. So overall, I think this is a really solid slate. I did want to mention my stackable teams here real quick. I basically have 3, and that's the Orioles, the Brewers, and the Rangers. And so do keep that in mind when you're building your lineups. Thank you guys for liking, commenting, subscribing, and have a nice day, guys.